Hello interwebs and welcome to my channel. Well, as we all know, Star Trek is one of, if not the longest running science fiction franchise in television, and certainly in American television. And when you have a series that has done 50 years of stories, or over 50 years at this point, 13 movies and 10 series if you count the animated series and short treks, and then we also have Strange New Worlds coming out, there's a lot of Star Trek out there. And when you tell that many stories over that many years, of course, you're bound to repeat yourself every once in a while. So for today's video, we're gonna do a little bit of fun and talk about 5 times that Star Trek copied itself. Now, these are not the only or the most egregious times that Star Trek has copied itself. I could probably make a list that would go on for days and days and days and days and days if I was going to try and list all of them. I mean, I've barely been doing YouTube for a year and I'm really finding it hard to not copy myself all the time. But for this video, I'm just gonna pick 5 ones that I found to be particularly interesting, particularly noteworthy, maybe tell you a little cool behind the scenes facts about Star Trek that you may not have known. So that's what this episode's gonna focus on, and I think it's just gonna be a lot of fun. So join me as we pick 5 times that Star Trek copied itself. All right, the first time that Star Trek copied itself that I'm going to be talking about is one that I think is probably one of the most egregious and obvious, and that is when Star Trek literally copied an episode of itself with Star Trek Enterprise called Doctor's Orders. Now, the episode Doctor's Orders is an episode where Phlox has to put all the members of the NX-01 Enterprise crew under sedation because humans can't survive in a certain expanse of space that the Enterprise happens to be going through. And so in order to keep them from, dying, he has to put them under, and only himself and Paul, the only non-humans on the ship, are the only ones that are able to survive while walking around on the ship. And because of that, Phlox starts experiencing some hallucinations and getting affected by the expanse and starts seeing things, and weird, creepy stuff starts going on a ship where it's all empty and haunted and scary and weird. And it would have been a really, really cool idea if Star Trek hadn't already done it only a few years before over on Star Trek Voyager in the episode 1. In the episode 1, the USS Voyager comes across a strange, weird expanse of space that the crew can't go through fear of dying, so they all have to be placed in stasis, and only 2 members of the crew, the only 2, I guess 7 is human, but whatever. The only 2 members of the crew that can survive are 7 of 9 and the Doctor, 2 non-fully human members of the crew. And guess what happens? It's spooky and creepy and weird. Things start to affect 7 of 9 because she's in this space, even though they thought that it wouldn't affect her, and she starts having hallucinations and weird PTS dreams. Except for that episode is so much better because it actually relates into 7 of 9's arc. 7 of 9 was a former Borg who was used to having so many people around her, and now she was just solitary. She was one. She had to do all this by herself. So that story kind of fit in with her arc. Over on Star Trek Enterprise, when Phlox did it, Phlox, I guess, is a very extroverted character, so not seeing people was kind of hard for him, but it wasn't really tying into his arc. I mean, the episode literally just ends on the fact ha! Wasn't that weird? I was having hallucinations. That's kind of funny. Well, let's wake everyone up now.
I decided that my delusional account would probably prove entertaining. As always, you have my best wishes. Your friend and colleague, Phlox.
That's literally how that episode ends. There's no larger point to it, just kind of yeah, that was the thing that happened, I guess. It's kind of frustrating and upsetting, especially when it was already so well done over on Star Trek Voyager. Now, the next time that Star Trek copied itself that I want to talk about is over on Star Trek Discovery with the actual physical ship, the USS Discovery. Many of you who watched Discovery may have been wondering, it's the Discovery has the actual ship has such a unique and interesting design. It's got this bronzy color, it's got a circular front, but it has a much more kind of triangular, weird look at the bottom. It's such a unique and interesting design. I bet many of you wondered, oh, who came up with that design? That's such a cool and interesting and unique design for a Starfleet ship. Well, actually, someone came up with that design for that ship decades before Star Trek Discovery was even thought of. You see, there was this movie that was planned to come out that Gene Roddenberry was working on called Star Trek Planet of the Titans. This was a movie that was going to be made after Star Trek the original series, and after a few years of trying to get Star Trek back on the ground and get going again, finally Paramount was like, oh yeah, we'll do a movie. So, Gene Roddenberry pitched a movie called Star Trek Planet of the Titans, which actually is a really cool idea. If you look into the story of it, it actually seemed like it would have been a pretty cool movie. But for the movie, they actually had some designs commissioned for a redesigned USS Enterprise, and one of the looks for the Enterprise that they basically kind of settled on was what the USS Discovery now looks like in Discovery. So Discovery sort of took this design from this never aired Star Trek movie and basically took that ship design for what the Enterprise was supposed to be and made it its own ship, which honestly I think is incredibly cool that they finally like took that really cool and unique design out of obscurity and actually made it canon and made it a thing. And it actually kind of makes it even funnier when you do see the Discovery and the Enterprise on the same screen together actually doing things together, because it's like, oh, those technically are both the Enterprise when they were first designed. I think that's just a really cool idea and really cool thing that they did for Discovery, and a little cool little Easter egg for all of us in the know. All right, the next time Star Trek copied itself that I think is actually really kind of funny, because it's really, really obvious when you think about it, but not everyone really makes the connection. And I'm honestly surprised that not a lot of people did. And that is that Riker and Troi from Next Generation are actually copied characters from Star Trek the Motion Picture. Namely, Captain Decker, the captain of the Enterprise in that movie, who was kind of all pissy that Kirk came in, and Ilea, the girl who became the probe and eventually merged with VOYAGER at the end of the film. If you really, really think about it, Commander Decker, or Captain Decker, is very, very similar to Riker. And Ilea is very, very similar to Troi, and the fact that both of them have a relationship with each other is also very similar. Captain Decker and Ilea are lovers. They instantly knew each other. They had a prior relationship before we saw them on Star Trek the Motion Picture. And Ilea comes from a planet that is much more known for being kind of promiscuous. She literally has to say to Kirk, it's like, I've taken a vow of celibacy because my people apparently fuck everybody up, which is a thing that is in Star Trek, because thank you, Gene Roddenberry, for that.
My oath of celibacy is on record, Captain. May I assume my duties?
By all means.
And actually, when Decker was originally conceived for Star Trek Phase 2, which was the show that was going to be made that kind of morphed into Star Trek the Motion Picture, he was actually supposed to be the first officer of the ship under Captain Kirk, and they kind of made him the captain, so to sort of have that dynamic with Kirk that we see in the motion picture. But when we get over to Star Trek The Next Generation, they basically took that idea of Decker, of this guy who was first officer under Captain Kirk, and placed him into the Next Generation as Riker under Captain Picard, and then gave him the same type of relationship with Troi. They instantly have a connection that they had previously before we actually saw them on the show, and you know, Troi comes from a much more promiscuous, kind of open sexual society than we had seen previously in Star Trek. So you really kind of see a lot of the parallels between Decker and Ilea and Riker and Troi if you really look for them. But I'm honestly surprised, even though it's kind of very obvious, and I think they even talked about it in the creation of the show, not many people instantly make that direct connection until they actually think about it. So I just think that that's kind of a cool parallel there. Speaking of really cool and interesting connections between different shows and like weird things that crop up between different characters kind of having the same impetus, the next time Star Trek copied itself I'm going to be talking about is Burnham and Sybok, the two like oft forgotten siblings of Spock, apparently. Now, when we first met Spock on the original series, he was an only child. Sarek never talked to him, and that was sort of like all we generally knew about Spock's home life. But when we got to Star Trek V, which was the fifth Star Trek movie, I don't know why I felt the need to reiterate that considering it's literally in the title. But anyways, when we hit Star Trek V, we got to meet the rather surprising addition of Spock's half-brother, Sybok, a character who had never been talked about before, and apparently just, you know, Spock just never mentioned and bothered to mention because he never thought he would come up, and Spock kind of having a shame in talking about Sybok at all because Sybok just had all these emotions. He was like a very emotional Vulcan. It's something we would even see on Star Trek The Next Generation a lot of characters just having surprise siblings and parents that we never knew about until like season 6 or 7 that just appeared out of nowhere. It's sort of like a recurring trope in Star Trek that characters just have random siblings that just appear out of nowhere. But by the time we got to Star Trek Discovery, one would have thought they would have gotten over that, but no. The main character on Discovery, Burnham, happens to be the adoptive half-sister of Spock, this random sibling, another random sibling of Spock that Spock just never happens to mention. Now, we kind of get an explanation for that in Star Trek Discovery Season 2, where we know that, you know, Discovery goes into the future and their mission is classified, so Spock can't really talk about it at all. You know, they retroactively make sense, but it's gonna be really difficult for Spock to have these two siblings in his life, especially one like Burnham, who clearly meant so much to him that he just doesn't say a word about. I get the fact that you're a very private dude, Spock, but come on, I often mention my brother every once in a while. Like, I don't talk about him every single day to my coworkers, but like, you know, give the dude a mention. It's just kind of funny that Spock just had, like, you know, if they have another Star Trek series or another Star Trek movie at some point where they reveal that Spock had, like, an adoptive, like, trans sister, like a different gender, like a genderqueer sister, I wouldn't be surprised at all, because Spock, I assume at this point Spock has, like, 500 siblings that he just never mentions at all. All right, and the final time that Star Trek copied itself is probably a very obvious one, but I thought it'd be just funny to mention here in this video, and that is the time that Star Trek The Next Generation literally copied an episode from the original series, and that was The Naked Time in the episode of The Next Generation, The Naked Now. I understand the impetus for the idea of The Naked Now, where it was like, all right, we have a new Star Trek show, we kind of want to tie it directly into the original series to show like this is in the same universe, it's definitely its own Star Trek show, it's definitely connected to Kirk, that definitely happened. So I understand them wanting to like reference the original series in some way, shape, or form without like bringing in old characters, like having like Spock appear or something, because that would get too distracting and kind of overtake the show and not let the show kind of have its own identity. But why The Naked Time? Just to have this like weird alien like virus that makes everyone go crazy. And then on top of that, why would you have The Naked Now, where in The Naked Time, it did make some people horny, but generally it's like kind of made people crazy, kind of made people emotional, kind of made Sulu like want to dance around with his phallic object sword. But in The Naked Now, it just made everyone horny. And you know, you can tell, like I was mentioning earlier, that's definitely a Gene Roddenberry edition. Gene Roddenberry liked to add sex to pretty much all of his scripts. So you can tell it's like, yeah, everyone is horny and with this virus now. And as much as I understand the impetus to want to connect to the original series, it feels like such a blatant copy and paste with like weird pseudo-sexual stuff going on that Gene Roddenberry really needed to work out on top of it, that it really is just a bad episode. However, it did give us the fully functional line from Data, which I thought was absolutely hysterical and is, you know, honestly makes the entire episode worth it.
You are fully functional, aren't you?
Of course, but
How fully?
in every way, of course. I am programmed in multiple techniques. A broad variety of pleasuring.
You jewel, that's exactly what I hoped.
But those are all the times that I wanted to talk about in this video where Star Trek copied itself. But where are some of your favorite times that Star Trek copied itself? Let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this video for more Star Trek lists, discussion of social and political issues, through topics, all of that fun stuff. Also, help me out over on Patreon. Every little bit helps me pay the bills and get to do more videos for all of you out there. But regardless, if you subscribe or help me out on Patreon, or, you know, even comment and then this, I can't speak today, or even comment in this video, I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, especially right now considering everything that's going on in the world. You keep me motivated and you help me continue doing this channel every single month. I could not do it without you. And a special thanks to my patrons, Polymena, Mystic the Monarchete, Bree Beecher, Din Hagney, Dante St. James, Anti-Cat808, Patrick Shannon, Wayne Twitchell, Wen Dizzlebizzle, Subraxis, Zach Cody, Maeve, Jason Knott, Maggie Evans, Christy Marie Johnson, Gavin Robinson, William Stewart, Michael Beam, Miranda Janelle, Mari Neckar, Lorena Mesa, Wellington Marcus, Susan Banks, Buttoneer, Ish the Mad, Ashley Allen Bociccio, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Stefan Schuhart, Greg Gillum, Christina Dalliance, Ashlyn Solstice, and Eli Bergmoss. Thank you to all of you.